You are Locked On Hawks Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Hawks Postcast, your home for the best Atlanta Hawks talk and local insight you can't get anywhere but here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra. Batiste. Alongside me is NBA college basketball analyst DeShaun Tate. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And our Locked On Hawks Postcast is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So looks like to me that, hey, at the end of the day, DeShaun, if, and that's a big if, by the way, if you decide to give the Hawks the opening, maybe they'll take it. We'll talk about that in our turning point. And the guy that does what he does and has done it all season long, did it again tonight. We'll talk about who he is as our player of the game. But first, unfortunately, as good as all of that sounds, we're not talking about a win here, by the way. We're talking about a 121-114 loss by the Atlanta Hawks on the road to the Houston Rockets. And DeShaun, you said simply this: at the end of the day, when you look at the Hawks and where they are here and where the Rockets are here, size definitely wore down.
It did, Tenitra. And listen, a lot of people would, looking at this game, you would think that the elephant in the room was probably Jalen Green's 32 points and looking like he could do any and everything that he wanted, dunking the basketball, getting on transition, fast break, kind of feeling like he's doing it all by himself. But obviously with this being a game in which the Houston Rockets got out to a 25-point lead and, it just really, and that was quite early in the game, it really just, it had so much to do with the fact that the Atlanta Hawks were just outmanned, really. I mean, just out, just the size alone is just a little bit too much. And I can see where something like that can happen, because where you have guards and the phenomenal guard play, all that stuff does matter. But if 3-point shots aren't falling for the Atlanta Hawks like they weren't on nights like tonight, making your money can be really, really easy when you have big guys to just dump the ball down into. And the Houston Rockets typically run out there a pretty sizable lineup already anyways, where you had, for example, someone like a Amen Thompson, who's really like a 6'7" guard, and that's like point guard / like point forward type of thing.
Yeah. You
don't have him in the starting lineup on tonight. Instead, you take Tari Eason and put him out there. He's closer to about 6'8", 6'9". Alperen Sengun, who is an all-star this year for the very first time. Don't need to talk about how great he has been all year long in the front court. He's got 18 and 9. And where a lot of that was guards, but it was primarily the size that was coming off the bench. The Jabari Smith was 17, and Steven Adams, he's a load for anybody, taking two players to probably guard him in most cases, the way he rebounds the basketball and so forth. And some of their bigger players like Jock Landale and Cam Whitmore didn't even play on nights like tonight. It was just too much size, especially when we don't have a Clint Capella out there. We can't even by default throw like a Larry Nance out there, who is really a bonus for us on a typical night with anything that he's able to give. So it was just, I can't appreciate the way, however, that the Atlanta Hawks fought considering the circumstances. Onyeka Okongwu held his own. We saw some really good play out of Risashe as well, something we've been really accustomed to seeing, but it was just a little bit too much, just easy dominance, it felt like, especially early on for the Rockets before a comeback was made.
Yeah. And for me, I would agree. I think that when you find yourself down by as many points as the Hawks did, and I know certainly we're going to talk about that point a little bit later in the show, but it does beg the question of, well, how did you get down to that point, right? And I think one of the main ways and one of the reasons that you get down like that, in my opinion, is because, and this was my take on it as well, is because of the backcourt. I think personally, when I look at it, it was the backcourt blues 2.0. So when I look back at the first game, the first game was actually a little bit closer because the Rockets only beat the Hawks by 4 points back when they played in late January. But and as you mentioned, Amen Thompson played in that game, did not play tonight, but the guards who played that game, they played tonight, and they brought just about the same intensity and the same energy, especially a pickup and an uptick in offense from Fred VanVleet. Now, you mentioned Jalen Green earlier. Jalen Green actually had just as good of a game that first go round as he did this time. Fewer points, 25 points in that last game. Obviously, you mentioned it, 32 points tonight, but a little bit more effective even on the defensive side of the ball. 7 rebounds in that first game, 11 rebounds tonight. And that's where, for me, it kind of says, okay, well, when I look at what the Hawks backcourt did, even looking back at that game and kind of looking at where they were tonight, you just kind of didn't get that same productivity, with the exception of, and let me just take a quick peek because I apologize, but sometimes when you're on the road, you have some challenges with your internet access or with Wi-Fi. But yeah, when I look at Trey's numbers still pretty solid, but really not enough of a compliment in the backcourt for the Hawks to be able to offset Jalen Green having a better night than he had 2 months ago, and certainly not offsetting Fred VanVleet, because again, in that game 2 months ago, Fred VanVleet scored all of 5 points.
All of 5
points. Tonight, Fred VanVleet had 21. So if you are looking at that gap, that 7-point gap, if you will, still not as much or a little bit more of a gap than there was a month and a half ago, I still say you can point to spaces and places like that with Fred VanVleet, with Jalen Green, where the Hawks really didn't have an answer 2 months ago and didn't kind of have enough of an answer tonight, especially when you're getting strong two-way play from the guards from the opponent versus what the Hawks backcourt did, especially at both ends.
No, and that's true because, I'm glad that you mentioned something about Fred, because I thought that he would be a really key piece if this Hawks team was going to have to find a way to be able to, advance and be able to get a win, especially because of the fact that, he had been coming into this game over the course of the last, 4 or 5 games, shooting 40% from 3, which he didn't shoot as well as that on tonight. But it was good to see that, the Hawks were able to put some defense on him a little bit. And of course, you got to give Trey a little bit of credit for that as well, because of the fact that Dyson Daniels was so busy guarding, Green in that situation. So, I just thought that was something that would be key. You really needed to stay home on VanVleet and kind of contest his shots, kind of alter his shots the best way that you possibly could if you're somebody like a Trey. And we all understand or overstand rather how defensively challenged sometimes that can be. But I think because they are similar in size, and Fred VanVleet is not the most explosive guard, right? Stocky and strong and all of that, but not necessarily explosive to the point where he's not a guy that Trey can't keep up with to a degree. So they really needed to play denial in the front court. I think a couple other keys to this was for them to not underestimate Alperen Sengun, specifically from an assist standpoint, because I'm not saying that he's like Nikola Jokic from a distribution or facilitation standpoint, but he does have very good vision and an underrated assist man to be a post player. He had 5 assists on tonight, which I think was okay for the Atlanta Hawks. They could withstand that. And then last but certainly not least, they needed to minimize the foul trouble, which is something I think they did a good job at doing, because they couldn't really afford very much room for error. I think they had to minimize that a little bit. They had to stay home on their players, and that's kind of tough to do when you have players as big as Houston has, and then just kind of limit the help defense. So where you do have the 14 turnovers for the Hawks, which was a bit too many, 26 fouls, which was way too many. There are some other things that actually contributed to, the Atlanta Hawks keeping things as close as they were able to, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a little bit later.
Indeed. But although we don't like the outcome or didn't like the outcome of the game, certainly we had to give and tip of the hat to the fact that the Hawks tried to make it a game late. We'll talk about that as our turning point next. This episode of our Locked On Hawks Postcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where'd all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, as I would recommend you to do the same, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. And for me, I wouldn't even say so much food delivery, but just food spending, period. And all-in-one convenience is right there for you with Monarch Money. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use your Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half of your first year. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money at monarchmoney.com.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
So DeShaun, after the Hawks found themselves down by 20 heading into the fourth quarter, they went on a 20-4 run and actually made it a game. That was our turning point. For you, what did you see where this Hawks team said, hey, we're down, but we're not out. We got some fight in us, and we're going to fight back to at least attempt to mount a comeback?
Well, I think that it started with the guy that has lately been kind of turning some heads if you look at it the last few games, and that's when in Zachary Reese-Shea. Now, some people are going to look at it and say, okay, well, he shot 0 for 6 from 3 on tonight. What could have been so impressive about him? But I think I'm just slowly, or not even slowly, but just becoming more and more comfortable with what I can expect from him.
Mm-hmm.
How much can you really expect from a rookie, a starter, a guy who's getting adjusted to the culture, the city, the team, the country, even in this situation? But I feel good about saying I'm comfortable with the fact that how he moves without the basketball is like really at an elite level. And I think a lot of that obviously goes to the credit of how the brand of basketball is played on the international level, how they share it and things of that nature. But he just does it so well with cutting and able to get easy baskets, showcasing some athleticism. Had a big time dunk on Alperen Sengun on tonight too, which was really crazy. So I think all of those little things. But I will say this much. I want to start out with this because I know that this was not necessarily during that particular run, but I think it led up to the one that we're alluding to. So in the first quarter, the Atlanta Hawks did go on a 15-0 run. Started out with the score being 9-2, turned that into a 16-9. That was over the course of a 4-minute stretch where Zachary Reese-Shea scored 9 of those 15 points during that stretch. We fast forward that now into what we've seen in what I call a little bit of a third quarter snoozer. I was over there kind of nodding off back and forth a little bit to Tenitra, just being transparent until they hit the fourth quarter alarm clock. A 20-4 run for the Atlanta Hawks in the fourth quarter, 94-74 at that point. The Hawks flipped that into going down 20 to only going down by 4 in a 5-minute stretch between Zachary Reese-Shea, the combination between him and Terrence Mann. They scored 12 of the Hawks' 20 points during that stretch. And I think it was some other things that really had to help going the Hawks' way, but they had the energy on the road. Remember, we were always talking about at home at State Farm Arena, how things tend to sometimes not always go their way, things like that. They play better on the road for some reason. Jabari Smith, an Atlanta product, ended up with a tech. got a little frustrated from some things that the Hawks were doing really well defensively. That happened in that stretch. A shot clock violation for Houston in that stretch, and a humongous block by Beat Krejci on Alperen Sengun during that stretch. We saw the Hawks outscore the Houston Rockets 40-27 in the fourth quarter. That was a huge turning point to a game. Yes, they lost by 7, but they got to a point where they even cut it down to 3 points after a big time 3 from Georges Niang.
Yeah, and I like the call out of Terrence Mann, because we've been talking about individually, at times collectively, the impact that we've seen of the players that the Hawks were able to acquire at the trade deadline. We've talked about some of those flashes, most recently with Georges Niang being one of our players of the game. And then we talked about Caris LeVert. Obviously, we kind of already knew what to expect from a Caris LeVert. But Terrence Mann, I can remember in the beginning when things were picking up slowly with Caris LeVert, and really hadn't picked up at all with Georges Niang. We talked a lot about Terrence Mann and what he was able to do. So I kind of like the fact that we're talking about him again, and then looking, like you said, at his stat line, and the fact that we're having this conversation about Terrence Mann doing what he did. And again, internet access challenges, but it looks like, if I'm reading the stat line correctly, 7-12 from the field, 2 of 5 from 3, and 4 rebounds. And more importantly, doing that off the bench in 25 minutes, I think is pretty impressive. I think it's very encouraging, because oftentimes those role players, you don't really see them do those kinds of things on the road. And so to see Terrence Mann, whom he's been quiet for the last couple of weeks, and we've been quiet about for a while now, to see him pick up the pace on the road, I think is important. But I will say one thing. I think that part of the reason that the Hawks were able to at least attempt to come back, but unfortunately were not able to sustain it, was something that we kind of seen. And it was something you alluded to in the last segment. And that is, again, going back to that backcourt and how Houston decided to defend. And when Houston threw out that half court defense, the Hawks had a little bit of trouble with that, because the Hawks we always talk about how they're one of the teams in the association that is at the top when it comes to pace of game. So Rockets found a way early and often to keep them off their pace. And a lot of that was a large part of why they weren't able to actually complete the comeback. But another thing that helped them with the comeback, and that was a part of that turning point, was the fact that 86.7%, that's a good number for a good reason for an almost good comeback. And that's what you'll be talking about.
This is what you'll be talking about.
So if you know anything, like our guy, Robert Blackman, who joins us every night, he's with us tonight. Appreciate the love and appreciate the support as always. You guys know, if you are one of our everydayers, every post game, what is DeShaun and I, what is our number one thing to talk about? We go up and down that stat line, and we have got to know what they are doing at that free throw line. DeShaun, I'm proud to say, and you brought this to my attention, 86.7%. That may have been our favorite number tonight. There were some numbers we didn't like. DeShaun called it out. We don't like when we have to talk about double-digit turnovers. Yeah. But we like when we were talking about a number at the charity stripe that is north of 80, because if you're going to struggle with a half-court defense, at a minimum, and you can't run up and down and get back in transition, then at a minimum, get to that free throw line and be able to actually convert to keep yourself in games like this. That's how you claw your way back into it and make it a game.
Tenitra, if you needed more proof to how important free throws are, think about this. I just kind of ran everybody down, essentially, what happened in the fourth quarter to give these guys a chance at being able to be in this game and give them a chance to win. Obviously, Georges Niang hits the 3, and they're only down by 3 at that point. Without those free throws, it's that 3-pointer by Georges Niang and this whole run that they went on. We're not talking about them being down by 3. We're talking about them still being down by double digits. if we're going from 86 even to just a smaller number, but it's still a respectable free throw percentage to a degree, let's just go from 86 to 76, which it definitely needs improvement. But we've seen this team shoot in the 40s and 50s for crying out loud before from the line. Even if it's a respectable 76, they'd still be down by double digits. So I think that this is where you kind of do got to give them some credit, because you know, there aren't a lot of games that we can say that not only that they are able to shoot this well from the free throw line, but this is just like living proof that that should be something that's talked about in this locker room. Did it equate in a win? No, but I think there needs to be some heavy emphasis in the locker room or in the film sessions, right, that is put on. If we hadn't hit these free throws, imagine how much more we would have had to work. And then obviously we wouldn't have been in position to be even, you know, talking about cutting the deficit down to one possession. So I think that that was very important for this Hawks team. And then not only that, I mean, when you look at how good of a job that they did, considering the fact that they were undersized, and Onyeka was really the only big man, respectfully to Dominic Barlow, who has been working his butt off and doesn't get enough credit. It doesn't always show up in the stat sheet. He ain't always going to have anything north of maybe 8 points a lot of times, but you can see clearly that he has really been working and doing the best of his abilities. How about this in the paint from a scoring standpoint? 54 points in the paint for Houston, 52 points in the paint for Atlanta. That has to say something when you have two guys, one of them in a Hawks uniform, for the very first time, the other one in a permanent starting role for the very first time against the number 2 seeded team out west, who just have size all over the place. I think you got to give them some credit for that as well.
Yeah, it's crazy that when I look at the stats and see somehow the Houston Rockets have creeped up into that number 2 spot, it's like, that's crazy work. But speaking of seeding, when you think about the Hawks, who seem to really be solidly in that 7 spot, which again, we've said when you're 35 and 37, so if I'm doing that quick math, that's 72. So you got 10 games left in the regular season.
That's
all
right.
of it counts to be able to hit your free throws, because let's say that you end up in that 7th seed and you end up hosting a play-in game and that game gets tight. Don't you think if you have an opportunity and the Heat seem like they're destined to be in that 10th spot, it seems like they trade places with the Bulls more than the Hawks trade places with the Magic for 7, 8. Let's just say that you are in that spot. DeShaun, how many games between the Hawks and the Heat and the Hawks and the Bulls in the last couple of years have been decided by a bucket or two? Every now and again, you'll have the Hawks blowing out the Heat, or more often the Heat blowing out the Hawks. But for the most part, those Bulls games, very, very close. Those Heat games, pretty darn close. So that's why we talk about the free throws, because when the game starts to slow down and the game maybe is played a little bit more inside out than it is in the regular season, if you can get to the cup and you can actually get an and one, or even if you can't get the and one, but you get an opportunity to score 2 points that way, then I'm all for it, because that's the kind of thing that's important when the game starts to change. It starts to slow down when you get into the postseason. So yeah, 86.7%, good number for good reason, and good reason for us, yes, to call out this guy again, because he just is that guy. And that's why he's going to be our player of the game that we talk about up next.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
This is the Locked On Player of the Game.
Shameless plug, definitely watch the bracket breakdown. I'm one of the hosts for those shows that are going to be on Amazon Fire channels from now and throughout the rest of March Madness. Just an absolutely good look. So definitely just wanted to put in a shameless plug to check that out, but also put in a shameless plug for the player of the game, because DeShaun absolutely loves this guy's game. I love his game too. So we have no problem telling you what seems like DeShaun every other night that Dyson Daniels is our player of the game. And for you, it was about what he did on defense, particularly cleaning up on the glass.
And I want there to make sure this conversation is held in case anybody comes to Tenitra and always talks about how DeShaun didn't believe in Dyson Daniels from the very beginning, because they would be telling the truth. But what Tenitra will always and forever tell people is DeShaun was openly and willing to say that he was wrong at the beginning, and he owned up for it every time he could.
He certainly does.
And I am being that person again yet on today. And by the way, like we always talk about, I'm so glad that it's happening the way that it's happening.
Yes.
When you factor in Dyson Daniels' numbers on tonight, the 19 points, the 10 assists, the 8 rebounds, people are just not even going to really pay much to that particular stat alone. Sounds great. There's also a 50% from the field and a 50% from the 3-point line that you have to insert in there as well, which kind of puts a little bit of icing on the cake. But I think the most important thing there for me is going to be from a rebound standpoint, and not just because I really have a thing for, those players who are guards that can rebound, because they never get enough credit. We always talk about the bigs and how good of a job that they do at rebounding, but we never do such things about those guards. We give the credit to the bigs who have assists more sometimes than we do the guards who have the rebounds. And when you look at how impressive that was, not just on, how impressive that was on tonight. Everybody knows how much I love rebounds, but even more so on the offensive end. 4 of those 8 rebounds were on the offensive end on top of that. Like, dude is literally doing everything. I know in football there's a term called ball hawking or something like that, where you're kind of flying around and all over the place. That's kind of how Dyson Daniels has not only been on tonight, but how he has been on the basketball court all season long. So give a lot of credit to Dyson Daniels on what he's been able to do, because he's doing it on the defensive end, on the offensive end scoring, on the defensive end rebounding, on the offensive end rebounding, assisting, shooting threes, mid-range, layups. Like, I'm not sure that there's really too many things that he hasn't done. So, I mean, I'm really enamored with the job that he has put forward for this team on tonight, and just what he's done all season long. I would not want to know. I repeat, especially without Jalen Johnson, I would not want to know what this team looked like this year without Dyson Daniels.
Yeah, well, I am enamored by the fact that you used football terminology. I'm like, is DeShaun talking about
March? In March.
Exactly. Talking about a DB? What is this? DeShaun talking about some secondary for football and making the analogy to what Dyson Daniels does?
I do a little bit.
It makes my heart so proud. It just really does. It just warms my heart. But I agree with you on Dyson Daniels. The impact that he has had to help keep this team afloat in the absence of Jalen Johnson, unbelievable. Because, with Jalen Johnson, you truly lost a player that was impactful at both ends of the court. He was our new walking double-double, and Dyson Daniels has really, really filled in a lot of the gaps. And we talked earlier about how the Hawks were able to claw back. It was because Dyson Daniels was also fighting for his life, trying to keep the backcourt of the Houston Rockets in check. So, you don't even really have a fighting chance, if not for a stat line of what we saw from Dyson Daniels tonight. And again, when I'm looking at 19 points, and like you said, I'm looking at 8 rebounds, I'm looking at 10 assists. So we're talking about essentially being 2 boards away from a double-double. And then, of course, his patented 4 blocks. You can't help but continue to tip your hat to him, because there's something to be said about being able to be impactful at both ends of the court. And the Hawks Better hope they get that out of Dyson Daniels Thursday night, because they've got a critical Eastern Conference matchup. We just talked about it, the importance of these games down the stretch, especially with other teams that are right there in the thick of things in the play-in. So hopefully they'll be able to go down to South Beach and get themselves a dub. Locked On Sports Atlanta is the #1 place to hang out after every game. So remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And for more on the Hawks, check out Locked On Hawks with our guy, Brad Rowland. We'll see you next time.